It is now time to welcome our next panel discussion of the day about the culinary expansion of influences on real estate markets. So let's welcome on stage our moderator, Michelle Martin, a broadcaster and talk show host, Money FM 89.3. Hello, Miss Michelle, my fellow radio DJ. Chef Dan Bart, Michelin star chef, Cadence by Dan Bart, Caper by Dan Bart. We have Kieran Gibb, founder and director of Monogic. Tanjirafe Tragulvungs, owner and manager, Cadence by Dan Bart, Caper by Dan Bart. And lastly is Edwin Tan, head of partnerships and media development of special projects, Property Guru Group.
Okay, so welcome everybody to a really delicious discussion. I'm from Singapore. We love our food. So I know that if I'm on air and I'm talking about food, it's going to be highly rated. And if I'm talking property prices, well, everybody starts calling in and chiming in. But I've never talked about food and property prices in the same breath. So I am really thrilled to be here today with a wonderful panel to look at how food culture across Asia is impacting real estate prices. I think the UN, UNESCO actually has done a great job tying the culture of food in a country to the money question, value. So UNESCO has a list of the top 50 cities of gastronomy. And Thailand, by the way, has earned 2 coveted spots in that top 50 list for Phetchaburi and Phuket. Well done, Thailand. And the Philippines, Iloilo, is the latest entry on that list. So you can imagine what all that positive press does for tourism and the economy for those countries, right? We're going to dig a little bit deeper into the whole topic of food and what it means for countries and the real estate. I'm going to start with the chef on this panel. And by the way, there are 2 Singaporeans on this panel, and there's a husband and wife team on this panel. You will get absolutely no prizes for guessing right. But I'm going to go to our chef first, Chef Dan Bart. I hear that you have to run, not walk to your restaurants if you want a seat in Bangkok. Yeah, you've done really well.
Okay.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
So you grew up in Chicago.
Yes.
You've worked with 2 and 3 Michelin-starred restaurants in Chicago. You started your own 3 restaurants here in Bangkok. Your last restaurant, Cadence, got a Michelin star in 6 months.
Yes, that's correct.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Fantastic job. So tell me, when you think about food culture in Chicago versus Bangkok, what are some of the differences and how different is it starting or running an F&B business in these 2 places?
Well, I think the first difference is, let's say, opening a restaurant. Back in Chicago is much harder. I think the entry fee and with the restrictions and the laws and all that makes it a lot more difficult. Bangkok is more friendlier for the entrepreneurs. For restaurant and real estate, they're so closely tied together. And I think you see it, Chicago, Michelin had a huge impact in the city. I remember when I was working, it was the year 2010 when Michelin came to Chicago for the first time. And after the inauguration, the real estate, the restaurant scene exploded, and then that follows with real estate, obviously, because money's pouring in. And now we're starting to see that in Bangkok. So, yeah, it's exciting times.
To what extent does a restaurant impact the surrounding neighborhood? Faye, you were chatting a little bit about this before we came on stage, about how the whole idea about building a successful restaurant is also about buzz, not just location. And you noticed that in your restaurants in the surrounding area, people were starting to get to know each other. It was really becoming sort of a friendly neighborhood. So to what extent can restaurants, high-end restaurants, impact the surrounding area?
Yes, it has a great impact. I like to use an example of street vendors. You know, when we go to street foods and the street vendors all over Bangkok, there's that sense of community. You know, maybe you go to this noodle shop since your parents' age, and now you're still going there because you feel like, okay, this is a special place where I can get my familiarity. I think that is a sense of community has been created. Same thing as Michelin star restaurant. We actually choose a neighborhood where we know that it could be a neighborhood restaurant. When we see our neighbors walking the dog, I mentioned you earlier, I'm like, I want to apply that sense of community to our restaurant as well. So choosing the neighborhood that's not so much of a prime high foot traffic spot, but it is a neighborhood where everyone can enjoy and maybe come for a weekend brunch once a week. So that's our goal to develop something for the community. And I think it elevates that appeal for the neighborhood a little bit when you have that amenity as a lifestyle. Right.
Kieran, you actually help with your business, Epicure Realty. You help F&B businesses find places to house themselves, to locate themselves. I suppose you can come from the other end of the spectrum. How important is location to a business's profitability in Hong Kong?
I think like F&B businesses are really finicky. You know, there's so many things that can go wrong, and I think the biggest one that we see go wrong is the real estate. Actually, restaurateurs, they create their brand, they create their concept, they do all their financial planning, and then they get into the location they've picked, and they start to wonder like, oh, hang on, why am I not doing as well in lunch service as I thought I were? And it's because maybe they're like 10 minutes outside of like the office district, and all that lunch business they thought was going to come from the offices isn't going to, because they're sticking around their offices. So yeah, like what we do is we kind of help them to actually put like a brand that's actually going to succeed in that venue into that venue. Yeah, because it's the thing, it goes wrong so many times, I also run like a marketing agency that works with restaurants and bars, of course. And a lot of the times, by the time they get to us, it's too late, right? They're like, oh, my restaurant's not doing as well as I thought it would. And obviously it's kind of difficult to then fix that unless you kind of completely change the business entirely. Yeah, sorry, I went on a tangent.
I think what he said is very important, because knowing your product, knowing your vision, to know who your customer actually is before finding a location is the key. A lot of times we get too excited to open a restaurant that we forget to think about that. So if we know, let's say, for example, our restaurant Cadence is not so much of a high traffic sort of restaurant, because it's more of a destination dining spot. So we know we don't really need to be in the business district too much. Maybe residential area works as well. So now, okay, we know we don't need foot traffic too much. Then that's when we start finding the locations. Chef is actually better than me in terms of knowing where to go in Thailand, weirdly, because I'm Thai, but now he gets a little bit better.
Wait, you're Thai, he's Korean American, but he knows which locations in Thailand are better. Okay, got it.
I'm her driver, so I know the map a little bit better.
I get lost going out from my home. I'm like, which direction?
So know your customer, that is so key. Because you're serving a certain ecosystem, so you need to know who you're appealing to. And then what do? I mean, take us behind the scenes when you're looking for a place. When you came, you first started with Upstairs, is that right? That restaurant?
Our first restaurant. That's back in 2014.
That was your dream come true, right? A restaurant here in Thailand. So how do you go about finding a location? What's first? I mean, walk us through the steps.
So it's kind of what Faye was saying, to know our market and what we want to do. And we knew that, we were going for we already had Michelin star from Upstairs. So when we expanded, that's kind of what we're going for. So we know that a lot of our market or our guests will be driving their car, because not many people want to dress up, look pretty, and take the public transportation.
We've seen some, but they get
which
quite
is okay,
sweaty
right?
after.
But in generally, so we knew that we don't have to find a spot that's close to the BTS, and those are the, for the outside world, those are seem the prime spots, prime locations. But for us and what we were trying to do, it wasn't. So it was. For me, I knew that a lot of people would drive, so the accessibility was more important. Our small road connects to the two big roads, Ekamai and Pridi. There's a highway very close by. So the accessibility to get to our place, to have a open lot where they can, park their Ferraris, and those are very important. So, when we think about where we're gonna put the money in, instead of prime location, I think it was more important to find an accessible place with a little bit more open space for our
Can it
guests.
fit the Lamborghinis and the Ferraris and the Peugeots? And how
we
many can you
planned
pack
out
them
the
in?
driveway for them.
Fantastic. I love that approach. All right, well, speaking of travel, let's involve Edwin into the conversation. Talk to us a little bit about some of the most important investors here in Asia, and that is the Chinese market. How are Chinese property investors really shaping the Asian real estate market right now?
So basically, I'd like to give a brief context to everyone with regards to this question. So Chinese themselves traditionally are akin to buying properties to begin with, and they actually attribute a huge amount of money to do that because they felt that property investment is something stable as compared to other investment products. That's number one. And other investment product has more volatility for the expect. And it is something that they can actually pass on to future generations. So much so, over the last few years, Chinese have accumulated a huge wealth over the years, and which is why I want to focus a little bit more about Southeast Asia in the case of Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, whereby in the case of Thailand, as we all know, since 2017, the Chinese has always loved to come to Thailand and has remained to be one of the top destinations in Singapore. While it has reduced to probably the fifth placing based on my statistics, but just 2022 alone, it has garnered close to more than 500 million worth of transactions since borders reopened in Thailand. And I think this is a staggering figure to showcase that the demand coming out from Chinese investors are still very much valid. Going to Malaysia, historically, the buying demand from Chinese into Malaysia properties has hit a historical high in 2018. If I'm not wrong, it's about $2 billion. But obviously, over these few years, market sentiments have dampened, market has weakened. But since border reopens last year, especially, these Chinese investors and buyers have been coming back in waves, especially this year, where Chinese has reopened their borders. So lastly, I would like to talk about Singapore. Singapore will be a little bit more unique for this aspect, where most markets are experiencing somewhat like a market downturn over the last few years, especially during COVID. Singapore experienced somewhat on increasing trajectory where property prices is escalating like a bull run, especially in the last 3 years. But this is very much backed by a strong local demand, coupled with strong foreign buying as well, coming out from the Chinese as well. And it is evidently shown that Singapore government has threw out a slew of cooling measures, and as recent as this in April, foreigners buying properties in Singapore has to pay a staggering 60% in additional buying stamp duties. So this actually goes to show that the market within Singapore, Thailand or Malaysia is actually strengthening, and this goes to show that it's having a very strong demand. And sorry for being a bit long in my answer. I also felt that in this case, because of such demand happening in Singapore, Malaysia, and Thailand, we are actually seeing how these Chinese buyers would actually be keen to expand their network and buying in this region, which actually will show an increase in property prices. Yeah.
Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, hotspots for Chinese investors. So you actually help curate marketing solutions for property developers who want to reach out specifically to the Chinese market, right? Chinese investors, right? So what is it that they want? I wonder, because Chinese food, everywhere you turn in Singapore, you find a mala hot pot chain or Sichuan peppers. How important is food to the Chinese investor when they're thinking of property?
So basically, I think this is a very good question. I think food and real estate, would there actually be a direct connection? But come to think of it, actually, the secret behind here is that Southeast Asia and China, or Chinese, has this very Asian culture as I look at it. And since the early days, Chinese immigrants have flocked to Southeast Asia. And you actually see a fusion of Chinese culinary culture in every tinge of the Southeast Asian culture, whether it's in Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore, evidently in Malaysia and Singapore. And I feel that these cultural exchanges these similarities in this case causes more reasons why Chinese themselves will actually want to come down south, because simply for the reason that they feel so much at home. And there's also closer proximity, easy access to Southeast Asia, and also this is coupled with the Belt and Road Initiative driven by President Xi Jinping himself, going through on a G2G, business to business and consumer level. So I definitely see a lot of connection for that aspect where cultural coming in, and food is a good example to showcase this. Yep.
Wonderful, wonderful. I want to come to you, Kieran. I hear that Pennywise Hong Kongers are heading to China to shop, to dine, to eat. I wonder if you're seeing any impact on the food hotspots in Hong Kong. The food hotspots. Are you seeing more people sort of leave Hong Kong for China as opposed to what we think, lots of Chinese heading over to Hong Kong for food?
It's interesting. So obviously, like COVID has shaken things up a lot, particularly in with restaurants and the dining kind of habits of the local population, but also of tourists that are not coming into Hong Kong over the last 3 years. And so, a lot of the restaurants position themselves to cater to the local market specifically. But then, obviously, once everything opened up, everyone was leaving again. And putting all their money on overseas spending and travel because they've been cooped up for 3 years. Thankfully, now that obviously travel's resumed, we're getting a lot more people back into Hong Kong, particularly from China, that are coming down and they're, holidaying in Hong Kong, and they're, spending their money on the restaurants we got there.
So I hear a lot of Chinese chefs want to base themselves in Hong Kong because they see it as a pathway to internationalization. And I know you have a lot of brands under your portfolio, including Shake Shack. Well done there. Big international brands. What do you do? How exactly do you help these brands find locations? And do you use AI or big data in any way?
I think because the thing about Hong Kong's F&B industry is it's extremely traditional. There's not a lot of technology that's actually kind of integrated into the business at all, really. We're only starting. Well, I mean, a lot of our work is telling restaurants you need a booking system. Which is surprising. So it makes it really difficult for us to, measure the impact of, or where people are coming from, who they are, what they're, what's the demographic, and all. So it kind of comes down to a really qualitative approach to, finding the right spot. And it can be as manual as just, sitting and scoping out the location to look at who's walking by. Who are they? What are they doing at this point in their day? Do they have the intent to eat? What do they have the intent to eat? What else is nearby? What's the average check? And all these different factors that actually kind of help guide us then to a good understanding as to what would work in this location. And then obviously with the specific, venue, it comes down to then again, what does the space allow for? What does the licensing allow for? So a lot of the time, something like a fine dining restaurant doesn't need a lot of space because maybe it only has 12, 14 seats or something.
Needs a lot of car park space, apparently. Yeah. Needs a lot of car park space.
We have lots of car park space.
Are you seeing new strategies, though, over in Hong Kong? You were talking to us about entire buildings that are dedicated to F&B. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so actually there's this really good example. So Henderson Land, which is a real estate developer in Hong Kong, they actually have a couple of buildings that they really market specifically for restaurants, including one tower that is 100% F&B tenancy, which is surprising considering, F&B has kind of always been the least paying, right? Of the kind of tenants. So, but I think restaurant can market themselves, but they kind of have to cater to the whatever's around. What's the the market that's around them? But actually, the buildings themselves can create that market. So, this building, for example, by Henderson, they market it a lot, and they specifically market it as an F&B hotspot so that their tenants are still getting the traffic and attention despite having like no foot traffic. Because I mean, who's walking down a street and says, "Oh, I want to go to that restaurant on the 20th floor"?
Interesting, really interesting. Chef Dan, when we think about growing internationalization, people traveling all the time for work, thankfully, after COVID, how, as a chef, do you keep up with differing taste buds of the international traveler?
Well, I think taste is very subjective, you know, so it's really hard to just focus on taste alone, but pretty much I think it's hospitality, service. I think how people want to be treated is pretty universal language. So we focus a lot on service, hospitality. When it comes to taste, you know, I think I just have to do what I feel is right. You know, from personal experiences and now living in Asia for a while, for 10 years now, I think my taste bud is, you know, leaning more towards Asia. And of course, you want to support the local farmers and fishermen, so utilizing more of their herbs and produce kind of shifts that taste bud also. But yeah, I think there's so much going into it.
So much. I mean, do you have to think about refreshing your menus all the time? I mean, how often does that happen, really?
Yeah, it's nonstop. Like, I'm kind of thinking about food right now.
So am I. I'm on the right panel.
Yeah, so it's one of those where, you know, it's nonstop.
Okay. I'm glad this is not a manel, and there are two females. As a woman in the F&B industry, do you see more women jumping into the ownership role and sort of really shaping new businesses in F&B?
Yeah, a lot of my friends are actually in the F&B, you know, leadership roles. I don't really see it as women and men per se. I think, you know, a lot of qualities or values all individuals of any gender can probably accomplish in F&B, but I do think being a woman can bring some sort of diversity of experience and thoughts. So every organization, you need diversity of thoughts, right? You can't just think by yourself. So I think having me do what I know and him doing what he knows. I mean, I'm not going to cook because we would have no customers, but he would be doing the kitchen side, and, you know, I focus more on market research, you know, knowing our customer behavior, operation flow, or guest relations sort of thing. So as long as each puzzle or each one of us knows our expertise, I think that's what's the key to, you know, running a successful business.
Kieran, help us understand. Where are you from originally again?
I'm from London.
From London, so from the UK, now based in Hong Kong. Beautiful wife from Hong Kong is with us today. Hi. And you advise businesses who want to set up base in Hong Kong on where to find the right property. What are their main considerations right now?
I think obviously there's the kind of more, you know, what would you say, like general like trends that are happening in Hong Kong. So for example, there's like a real shift happening in fine dining, for example, like fine dining up, you know, like I think there's an era that's over in Hong Kong, at least for now, which is right at the top level, the extravagant, over the top menus that cost like, you know, thousands of dollars, which used to be very commonplace in Hong Kong. And still, you know, there's still some that are still doing this, but we see, you know, just from all the businesses we work with, that there's actually really like a kind of declining trend on this. I think that may be something to do with the shift of, you know, tourism from, you know, more international cities to, you know, tourism that's coming from other places.
Really interesting. I want to come to you, Edwin. When we think of gastronomy and economies, what do you think Southeast Asian countries can do to really leverage on food culture to bring more tourists to their shores? Or investors?
So basically, if we are going on the culinary aspect, as I mentioned earlier, I think it's more pertaining to the similarities in Asian culture, comparing to investors for that aspect. So a little bit to the earlier point, I basically feel that because of that similarity, close proximity, and access from Chinese going to Southeast Asia, this is something that we can potentially expand. especially in the case where all these Chinese potential investors or buyers are also coming into Southeast Asia for business expansion, whether is it for immigration or even for education. You will see various elements of their lifestyle gradually moving into Southeast Asia, and this is very much evident in Singapore, Malaysia, and in Thailand. And for this aspect, I basically feel that where property is concerned, this provides a very huge opportunity because, as I mentioned, Chinese themselves love to buy properties, and if their key buying motivations lies in sending their kids over for education or immigration, at certain point in time, they will probably think that, hey, probably I should invest a property in Singapore, Malaysia, or in Thailand. And I think with the ongoing situation in China, especially where it is not as high value in terms of return of investment because property prices in China has escalated in the last 10 to 20 years, experiencing a good bull run. So as a Chinese investor, if I want to invest in something to gain more returns, probably I will look abroad. And Malaysia, Thailand, and Singapore remains of that high opportunity for them. And to add it on, I think there's also another piece of good news to share. As early as September 2023, there's this announcement by both the Thailand and Chinese government to say that there's a 30-day free visa for both tourists coming out from Thailand and China. And subsequently, just 2 months later in November, I think it's like probably 2 to 3 weeks ago, Malaysia actually has done the same thing. And they have actually advocated a 30-day free visa for both countries. And just fresh from the oven, probably like 2 hours ago, Singapore government and Chinese government has done the same. So traditionally, Singaporeans have the privilege to travel to China for 15 days, visa-free. But right now, they have extended this to Chinese visitors coming to Singapore as well, and it's a full 30-day. And I think all these are telltale signs to show that on a government level, they are trying to boost people-to-people exchanges, tourism, business expansion. And when business expansion is concerned, we'll definitely delve into F&B for sure. And in this aspect, investments will come in very strongly, especially when 2023 is a year where Chinese reopen their borders. And I'm very hopeful going into 2024 that there'll be a lot of demand and additional activities coming out from China and the rest of Southeast Asia. Yeah.
Really important point, because I remember reading that most foreign investors who park their money here in Thailand first experience this country as a tourist. So that 30-day visa fits right into that kind of thinking. Really smart point. Okay, with just a couple of minutes on the clock, I'm going to ask you all the same question and put aside any sort of unconscious bias, but tell me, what do you think could be the next culinary hotspot in Southeast Asia? Faye, take it away.
Culinary
Hotspot.
What
Which could it
country
be?
or-
Yes, it could be a country, it could be a city. It's up to you.
Thailand all the way.
How did I see that one
Represent.
coming?
No, I think Asia in general. When we we visited you in Hong Kong last time. So I think that what Hong Kong has that Bangkok might not be there yet is the market share. People that are willing to spend money for fine dining or experiencing, not just to get full out of food, but to enjoy the experience. Hong Kong is still quite far from Thailand at the moment. But I think Thailand, since Michelin started to come inspect us 5-6 years ago, things have shifted into another level as well. So I would still say Thailand because I do want everybody to be here and go to Cadence if possible.
I'm going for sure, if I can get a seat while I'm here. Chef Dan, do you agree with your wife? Is that generally how things work?
I think so.
You can disagree. I'm not.
You can
going
disagree,
to
you're on a
say.
panel.
Only on the
Yeah.
stage.
And I just love the cuisine here. It's so versatile, it's so diverse. And you can get best of everything in Thailand. I've had some of my best sushi, in Bangkok. Some of best Korean barbecue here in Bangkok. So, yeah, I think it's the diversity that makes it such a hot spot here.
That's great. Kieran, help us understand from what you're seeing with property prices and F&B businesses, what could be the next new Southeast Asian culinary hotspot?
Don't say Hong Kong.
Hong Kong's always been like a leader in culinary, like the culinary dining scene. Not only in Asia, but I think it's akin to London and New York and things like that.
You think it's going to keep that position?
But I think there's a lot of stuff that's moving out overseas. So I think we're looking at like Bangkok is up and coming. There's a lot of stuff that's moving into there. There's a lot of stuff that's moving to Singapore as well. Yeah.
Bangkok seems to win. Did you want to chime in, Edwin? Did you have a thought?
So I would like to take a slightly differentiated view. I would not like to pinpoint a specific country, but I would like to say that Southeast Asia on the whole will be a hotspot. But me being a Singaporean, I still tend to favor Singapore a little bit more, to be honest, because I see Singapore as a huge melting pot where it is a one-stop destination where you can experience the famous Thai cuisines, Malaysia, Philippines, and you can go a little bit further like Italian or Spanish. So I tend to be a little bit more biased, but I think to a certain extent, Singapore is a one-stop place where you can experience all the good culinary at one place.
I love how frank my nationalist panel has been. Everybody, a round of applause for Faye, Kieran, Chef Dan, and Edwin from Property Guru. I'm Michelle Martin. Thank you all for being with us.